this morning, we continue our conversation of the U.S. arrest and soon detention of Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro. Reports say Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, have arrived in the United States, landing at the Stewart Air Force Base in Newburgh, New York City. The former leader, captured earlier in the U.S. military operation, is said to be en route to the Brooklyn Detention Centre to face charges including narco-terrorism, cocaine importation conspiracy. And now President Donald Trump said the operation involved air, land, and sea forces and led to the capture of Maduro and his wife, who were flown into the country. These charges stem from long-running U.S. investigations into alleged drug trafficking networks. To discuss this development in Venezuela, we are joined by a global affairs analyst, Ejike Okpa. And of course, later on, hopefully, we will also be joined by journalist Adeniyi Kunnu. Mr. Ejike, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, sir. Ejike, let's start with the allegations leveled against Maduro of drug trafficking, among others. Wouldn't you say that the U.S. is acting as a judge in its own case?
You know, that could be true. You know, I don't have the intelligence, but you know, you remember when this happened to Panama, you know, Noriega, that was 36 years ago. It was the same thing. And instead of him, you know, coming to the table and said, hey, show me what you have. How can we make this thing right? He started, you know, acting like he can stand up to America. And we know what happened to him. He was arrested and he did some time in Miami federal prison until he was released and went home. And shortly after that, he passed away. So the point here is that Maduro, you know, Trump didn't wake up overnight to say, I'm going to go do this. There were some efforts, there was some communication, there was some intelligence. Instead, you know, he kept sending whatever, you know, he was sending. And, you know, at the time, the Department of War was out there in the ocean, you know, attacking all those shipments that, you know, allegedly had the drugs. But he never said anything. And it's very unfortunate that at the end of the day, he was captured and now, you know, he's gone from a presidential palace to now a prison in handcuffs. You know, I bet you he's going to wake up and say, am I in a dream or is this for real? It is for real. And you know, that's going to be a reaction for or against, you know, that's normal. But at the end of the day, Venezuela and Maduro has an egg on their face, and that is just he's going to suffer it because there's nothing anybody can say or do for him to be released. He's going to do time in America, and then somebody's going to replace him.
Oh, all right. Now, I want us to talk about the fact that what has taken place is that he is a sitting president. Nicolás Maduro, of course, not called to question the sovereignty of the nation. I want us to speak about that. Would you say that the U.S. should have gone about this in a more civil way?
Well, you know, this is not unprecedented. You know, there's a book, you know, for those people who would like to see, there's a book called Overthrow, and that Overthrow was written some years ago, how America has used its, you know, what I call manifest destiny and Monroe Doctrine and military might and money and all kinds of stuff to be able to do what they have done. You know, Saddam Hussein, we know what happened to him. What is his name? Gaddafi, we know what happened to him. And so many other leaders in the world, you know, that at some point they had to fall because America now showed interest in what they were doing and it just couldn't survive it. So, you know, for you to really honor your sovereign nation, the first thing you have to do is to do the things that is good for your own country people. Let your own people cheer for you and stand up for you. But you could see when this guy went down, you know, Venezuelans were celebrating. They were jumping up and down because they've been warning him out and they gave him opportunity to go and he didn't. And now he has egg on his face. He's a prisoner and you know, life is going to go on. Whatever anybody says, life is going to go on. After a few weeks or something, another world event is going to happen and people probably going to forget about that. So yes, you know, sovereign rights of nations have to be, you know, respected. But when presidents of countries start doing things that get the undue attention of somebody else, they're going to bear the consequences.
Now, we are joined also by international journalist Adeniyi Kunnu. You're welcome. Now, before I go to you, Adeniyi, Ejike, I still want to remain on with you. The question that I have is that, taking into consideration the fact that they have arrested him, he is a sitting president. When you mentioned having to get another president to be sworn in because right now it looks like he may do time. Let's look at what it looks like to swear in another president. Does the vice president automatically come in, or does the United States have leverage and veto power to make that decision as well?
All of the above, they haven't made a decision. Remember when Saddam Hussein went under, everybody that was involved in him was a toast. They were gone. That's when America appointed Paul Bremer, who was the sole administrator for a time, and then after that, it was handed back to the Iraqis. So in this case, I don't know what Trump is going to do, but that he may pause it. He may now look at the vice president and say, okay, fine. If the vice president were to step in, is he just going to be somebody else? Is he going to be doing the same thing Maduro did, or he's going to say, I'm going to take a different turn? We don't know. But that discussion obviously is going on now. They already knew who is going to replace who before they did this. So in the next few days, because the country cannot go without a president, there cannot be any vacuum of power. So somebody's going to step in. But I don't know how long that person is going to be in office.
Now, Adeniyi, I'll come to you. How unprecedented is it for a sitting or former head of state to be captured and brought to the United States for prosecution? Adeniyi, can you hear me? Please unmute your mic, sir. All right, Ejike, I'll jump that question to you, please. Can you assist me with an answer?
Well, again, like I said, sitting president, remember even in West Africa, Charles Taylor of Liberia, it was during Obasanjo that he had to, leave, Monrovia. He came to Abuja or somewhere, and then Obasanjo, facilitated him to be handed over to the International Court of Justice at The Hague. And we know where he is. He's doing time over there. And then you look at the Bosnia, Slovakia kind of, places, those people also had to be, Clinton took care of them, So this is not something new. We're just saying, how can we make sure in 21st century that these things don't happen? Because it's an embarrassment, apart from just the president that is arrested and locked up, is that it's an embarrassment to, people from that particular country to see their own president. If you don't like your president, it should be up to the people in that particular country to remove him, either forcing him to resign or do a special election to do that. But when you don't do your job, remember what I said earlier in the opening. It's I don't want to say dirty job, but we say it in Texas. It's a dirty job. Somebody has to do it. You don't want somebody from outside to come in and do these things for you, because there's always going to be a price when you don't do certain things. Again, my parents used to tell me something. If you don't do it, if I do it for you, you're going to pay me for it. So there's a lesson to be learned here. And that lesson is that, people supposed to be now holding their own leaders to a high degree of demand for what to do for them. Because, they're the ones that I said, I want to serve you as your president, but then they turn around to abuse you. They turn around to do certain things, and then you start dancing with them or worshiping them. Then it defeats the purpose. So no president of any country now is foreign to that particular country. They are all natives. So when your own sons and daughters, are doing things to you that calls undue attention from the world order, there's something needs to be said about that. It should be your first duty when you take that oath of citizenship. Take that oath of office to serve as a president. The first duty is for the people for that country. Nobody else matters. Right. It should be to make sure that those people are happy with you, because they're going to be the ones that come to your rescue or to your rally if you are doing something right. But if you're not doing something right, they don't care. You see the Venezuelans all over the world, especially those of them in Miami, that are jubilating that this guy has to go. So at the end of the day, the clapping, the chest beating is no longer effective because the guy is in jail now.
Right.
So it goes to the people, it goes to the people. I was born and raised in Nigeria. When you see Nigerian presidents and governors dancing, it's like, what are you dancing about? Yeah. People are suffering.
I'd like to move to Adeniyi right now and get his stance on the matter. Of course, you are welcome, Adeniyi. As we mentioned earlier, the sitting president of Venezuela has been apprehended in the United States, waiting to be flown to Brooklyn. I'd like us to talk about the legal processes. And of course, if you can let us know, what will these legal processes be and what will Maduro face in the U.S. custody at the moment?
Well, in the first place, let's tie it back to 2020, when the United States of America brought up certain charges against Nicolás Maduro. Let's understand that this transcends just the president of a country that has been charged on many counts in another country. It also has to do with hemispheric politics. Venezuela remains the country with the largest fossil fuel deposits in the world, followed by Saudi Arabia, followed by Iran. Then you want to go to a place like UAE, Iraq, and of course, Canada. Now, in recent times, China has made a very serious incursion into Southern America and is beginning to plant its step. Let's understand what is happening here. China is beginning to plant its foothold in Southern America. The United States, unarguably, is the global power. And you should understand that when you're talking about the Americas as a whole, there's no other superior power in terms of international capacity for warfare and all that than the United States of America. But in recent times, we're talking about China and the U.S., especially since President Donald Trump came to office, and now it's been issues like fentanyl coming in, talking about the chemicals that are used for it from China, one way or the other, through the United States of America to Mexico. And that in itself was part of the prompting why the U.S. president said, we're going to use tariffs to curb one of these things that have been happening. Now, let me give you the picture here. This man's country, Venezuela, had an election last year. He won, according to the electoral body, by 51% to Gonzalez, who came second at over 40% and was sworn in. Soon after, Cuba welcomed him and praised him. Vladimir Putin said he was welcome anytime. But other countries, Chile and some other countries in South America said, sooner than later, this is going to bite you in the thighs. And yes, it has done that. But if you look at the fact that a sitting president was taken out of its country, that is a serious concern for me as a person. And I think that when we talk about a country as having attained sovereignty, in international politics, we should never for any reason have a country's president, taken away from there and arrested. And another thing that gave me huge concern, I have to say that, because whatever it is the U.S. does resonates in different parts of the world. The U.S. leads lots of countries in many outstanding things that it has done. But when it comes to this kind of incidences, I think it is important for the leadership of the country to actually think it through regarding what kind of message you send. Mm-hmm. But as I said at the beginning of this, you're talking about control of gas, control of fossil fuel, control of energy, and you know that that is one thing that keeps the world running. And if China gets a control of that before the United States takes charge, it's going to be another battle entirely. And let me also say this, Nicolás Maduro met 6 hours with certain Chinese diplomats, superior officers before this happened. That particular arrest of Nicolás Maduro happened 4 hours or 6 hours before, 2 hours after the U.S. launched and they brought him in. So you should understand what is going on. And as we speak, I think that the coming days will open us up to a lot of discussions about global politics and international diplomacy, especially where the hegemonies of the world are going in terms of the power tussle as regards nations that have the capacity to sustain the world going into another century. That's very significant here.
Now, Adeniyi, before I go to the political situation that this will cause inside Venezuela, you mentioned a few things, and I'd like us to take a look at that, and maybe you just give us a bit of clarity. Now, in terms of a retaliation, I know that we have had some feedback from the United Nations, of course, Antonio Guterres, who also came back and condemned what the president did. And of course, the African Union as well, it came up and spoke against it. I'd like to hear from you, from a global and an international standpoint, what is the response and the retaliation that is expected for us to curb situations like this in the future?
Well, in the first place, I'm going to see if the United Nations as a body is able to issue any kind of sanctions like they do when Russia invaded Ukraine, and certain power blocks in the world supported the sanctions meted out against Russia. Don't forget also, you've got NATO's position, you've got the position of the European Union. Now, this is going to test whatever power that the United Nations has when it comes to superintending over issues and when it is impartial about it. Now, let me say this, and I need to make it very clear. Nobody is saying that Nicolás Maduro, who has been there since 2013, this is 13th year, has actually impressed with regard to leading people, with regard to what he does. And I would have actually loved it had the United States empowered Venezuelans as much as possible to take charge of that leadership by all means. But at the moment, we wait to see beyond words, beyond words. I'm hoping that we're going to have an emergency session at the United Nations General Assembly regarding this particular thing that has happened. And I want to hear the position of those that are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, because when things of this nature happens, everybody who doesn't have a seat as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council is toothless, is weaponless. So until we have a session convened based on what has happened, and having convened this session, we hear the position of countries like Russia, like France, and of course, like China also. Such short discussions about sanctions or trying to tell them to do one thing or the other is not going to happen. Whenever the U.S. gets you into this country, I can tell you for a fact, you will face the full wrath of the law, the full extent of the law. Don't forget we had Noriega, that at some point was considered somebody that was indeed doing what should be done, especially when you have to talk about Panama Canal and the importance of that region to global economy. So there is little, please take it from me here, there is very little that the over 180 members, thereabout, of the United Nations can do, except there is a power twist and posture by the UN Permanent Member Security Council. That is basic. Then at the same time, I think that the position of the African Union is clear, the position of Guterres is clear, meaning that they condemn this particular thing. But at the same time, I need to say this, that global power blocks must stop supporting despotic government on the African continent, because that will open these countries up to this kind of incidences. Let's look at a place like Ivory Coast, where they've not held proper elections, supported by somebody that, a country that is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, France. France has been supporting Alassane Ouattara, the same way France has held Haiti captive for many years. Yet these are permanent members of the UN Security Council. So you find out that even the UN itself is a conglomeration of many hypocritical members that at times they look in the other direction when should you actually speak to those issues. So until every global power bloc is able to say, if you don't do something right, we will dissociate from you. Now, what are the options that should have happened? If you have an election in your country, for instance, and it is obvious that the elections were not free and fair, the first thing that I expect countries like China, Russia, US, and the United Kingdom to do is to, first of all, dissociate from connections every support immediately from those countries. France has been committing that crime in Francophone countries, and the United Nations has been looking in another direction. So what temerity will a country like France have to now speak against what perhaps is being discountenanced by the United States of America? So until those emerging powers are able to speak with one voice against the power blocks that are hypocritical in their handling of global implicative issues, we are still joking. Ain't going to happen, as they say here in the U.S., and I think the days ahead will be interesting.
Ejike, let's come to you now. Could My question for you is, could Maduro's detention escalate tensions with Venezuela's allies, such as, of course, China and Russia?
It's not going to do anything. I was just listening to what the other guy was saying, and as much as I agree with what he's saying, UN has no power. All they're going to do is get together and pass a resolution. I mean, again, this is not the first time this thing has happened. What did they do when Noriega was locked up? What did they do when Saddam Hussein was taken down? What did they do, when Gaddafi was, taken down, and also many of this other stuff? So let us be clear on this. Venezuela may have the largest oil reserve, but guess what? They produce daily. People get caught up on this reserve business. I do valuation on oil and the real estate and stuff. What matters is your production, not your potential. You may have 300 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and so what they produce, Venezuela produces less than between 800 to 1 million barrels a day. Texas produces more oil than Venezuela. So when people talk about it's all about the oil, I said, let's just move away from that, because oftentimes he's going to think, it's because of this other interest. The point is that Maduro missed an opportunity to get his own acts right. If you take care of your home, every country is a home. If you take care of your home, and taking care of your home is looking at your own citizens, their complaints, their whining, their issues about your leadership. You focus on it, and you ask them, what should I do? Not to be jumping up and down. Okay, if China was in Venezuela, 6 hours before the attack, how come China didn't put up a fight? If China has an interest in that. So all of those, conjecture and, innuendos really doesn't matter. This is medicine after death. The point is, if there's a lesson to be learned, can any country look at what has happened and say, hey, let me take attention, let me take interest in the country that has sworn an oath to protect them and make sure that I don't embarrass myself and embarrass the country. It has nothing to do with mineral. No country has more oil than America. It's just that America don't want to, do certain things in the environment, so they look for places where it can be cheaply, exploited and produced. But hey, you know how many barrels of oil we produce in America? It's more than 13 million barrels a day. So the point here is, let's just focus on that. Let's look at leadership and responsibility and be responsive to your own particular country. America has manifest destiny, Monroe Doctrine. They have the military might. They may not win every war, but they can bring a war into your country and damage you. They have the media to tell a story about you, for or against you, and make you look so bad. And of course, the almighty dollar. The whole world, the currency, 70% of it is measured in the dollar. So before you can talk about, denting America, you have to have any of those three M's. But no country is going to be able to do. Even the China people talk about, China is a toothless bulldog. They can't do anything. If they ever engage America in a physical fight, America will crush them. But we're not going to go there. The point is, take care of your home in order so that the outsider is not going to come. I mean, look at Charles Taylor. African Union are going to come and say, what? They were there when Charles Taylor under Obasanjo was handed over to the International Court of Justice. What did African people do? Okay, the conflict between Rwanda and DRC, what did African Union do? So don't come on the world stage and start to make noise while at the same time your home is under fire. Just like what is going on in Nigeria. When the airstrike happened in Nigeria, has Tinubu showed up to make a comment. The next thing he hopped in the plane, is going to Europe, and then he's going to go to UAE for a summit. This is a case of a man whose house is on fire and is out there chasing rat. Is that what Nigerians want? You took an oath to be the president of Nigeria, not the president of the world. Take care of your own people. So, the Maduro thing, again, is evolving. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. As for how is he going to be treated, he's going to be treated fairly. He's going to have the rights to hire a lawyer and defend himself against the allegation of allowing drugs to come from Venezuela to America. That is the primary charge, not all this other thing about oil. America can do without oil from Venezuela. It's not going to dent us. It's not going to make any difficult consumer issues for us if we don't get Venezuela oil. Because again, it is the production per day and not the reserve capacity.
That's a very interesting take, Mr. Ejike. Adeniyi, I'd like to get your own response on this.
Well, it's important to understand that Ejike didn't quite get the optics right, and that perhaps was why he said what I mentioned were conjectures. I don't come on a global platform and talk about conjectures. I speak facts because these are the facts on the matter. And when you consider certain things, according to what we're saying, we say res ipsa loquitur, the fact speaks for itself. For everything that I've mentioned about the United Nations, even if there are resolutions to be made, for instance, we know the era of Boutros Ghali, that was the former UN General Secretary. We also know the previous person from Ghana and what they do. I'm simply saying here that it's very, very fundamental in global leadership to take a stand that is impartial. Nobody's disputing the might of the USA, and nobody's speaking about the fact that for the USA to have been involved in what happened in Venezuela was wrong. But I'm simply saying that the precedent actually set certain things on fire. And if we must really engage from a position where we do not begin to say that, yes, this side is done, that side is done, whatever was done in Venezuela to have salvaged the country was perfect. But I still believe that there are 1,001 more alternatives that should have been used, especially that's a sitting president of a country. And if you're talking about the oil I mentioned, even the conference given by President Donald Trump here at about 10:45 a.m., he spoke specifically that they have a lot of energy that the U.S. can work. I'm paraphrasing the president of my country here right now with what he said. So let's not say that what I'm saying are conjectures. These are facts. Then when you are even talking about a country that has minimal production capacity, yet it has a lot of oil reserve, that is potential that the U.S. has the capacity to exploit. Excuse me, let's not speak about the issue of a country having the capacity and that global powers do not need it. Every country that has potential could be related with, and the potentialities of such countries exploited to maximum advantage. And that's really what it is. So having said that, let's understand here that it is time for the power blocks of the world to actually change their position in respect of that. Whatever happens in this country with Maduro, I agree to an extent that it cost it, because even before now, President Donald Trump had told him he's got to resign, he's taking time, and things of that nature. Yes. But if you or anybody that has power finds himself in such a position where, according to what your electoral body said, you were actually voted for, it is a fact of the matter that it's going to be difficult for you to relinquish your position. And let me also put it here, that there are many things not spoken when that particular conversation happened. The media will only be given a side of the story. There are other things that perhaps made it difficult for Nicolás Maduro to leave that place. Do not forget, we're talking about a socialist system. Thus, the theories and the practice of socialism completely differs from the theories and practice of democratic dispensations in different parts of the world. So you're talking about a system that is entrenched differently, that is actually cut out differently, and that's going to be another difficult point. So on the one side, we're looking at the strength and capacity of America and the fact that the mediation processes are possible, not necessarily taking him out. I can tell you for a fact here that there are 1,001 ways where Nicolás Maduro would have actually exited that position, and yet the people of Venezuela definitely would do certain things. Now, let me also mention that I believe my friend on the other side also understands that for a period of time now, the United States will be the one handling the leadership of that country. When we are analyzing global politics, let's understand the implications for sovereignty. The people of Venezuela are superior than one man, Nicolás Maduro. So what happens to the collective sovereignty of that country? What are we looking at in terms of the communication that the leadership that is not indigenous to them takes over their country for a period of time? Let's understand these optics. If the optics are not right, even if you want to correct certain optics that are not right with recommended glasses, you still know that the sight is also not perfectly okay. So I'm simply saying here that I have support for any country that has the capacity to ensure that leadership is accountable, that leadership works, such as we have in my country, Nigeria, where the president is gallivanting. And I was also telling somebody earlier that perhaps if the US had taken this position when certain elections were held in 2023, what's going to be the outlook on the country? So I'm simply saying here that for every country of the world, immediately certain things are sensed that are not right. One thing that I always believe the West can do is to cut ties immediately from that country, because when a country has a leader that moves, for instance, let's look at Egypt quickly. The person that used to be in Egypt, the current president of Egypt, was a military general. He transited at such a pace that shocked the world and became a civilian person, and now is there. I'm simply saying that what the West must learn to do is that immediately anything is sensed that is contrary to the democratic values that they uphold in their country, or that we uphold in the US, for instance, they should stop connecting with that leader, because that is going to embolden the person and undemocratic practices will persist. Let's understand that the dynamics of international connection and collaboration must also change. No matter how we want to speak to these issues, let's understand that blue is blue and black is black, and we're not looking for the colors in between here. Please.
All right. Very interesting remarks there. But before we go further on the questions, in case you are just joining us, you are watching a live feed from New York City at the West Side Helicopter Port, where Nicolás Maduro is expected to arrive in the city after arriving on U.S. soil following operations in Caracas. The site is being mounted by a heavy security presence, and it promises to be a watertight process. And we earlier told you that the Venezuelan president in the United States on Saturday, arriving in upstate New York City following his capture in an overnight U.S. operations. The video showed a plane arriving at Stewart International Airport about 600 miles northwest of New York City, with several U.S. personnel in FBI and other gear boarding the aircraft after it landed. TV news networks, including CNN, Fox News, MS News, identified a person who disembarked from the plane as Mr. Maduro. Now, Venezuela's VP, DK Rodriguez, demands U.S. to free Maduro, calls him a country's only president. Now, Mr. Maduro was seen surrounded by the FBI agents as he descended the boarding stairs of a U.S. government plane at a New York State National Guard facility and was slowly escorted along the tarmac. The leftist leader was expected to be flown by helicopter to New York City, where he faces drug trafficking charges. So let's go now back to Texas and Chicago, where Ejike, Okpa, and Adeniyi Kunnu, who have been helping us with some optics with regards to Nicolás Maduro's ordeal and also the position. Now, gentlemen, interesting debate between the two of you there. My next question, Ejike, I will come to you now. My question for you is, could this action set a precedent for how the U.S. deals with other alleged foreign nationals and leaders?
Back to what my co-panelist here was saying. Optics and no optics and no optics. Remember, Paul Bremer was the sole administrator for Iraq, and he did it for as long as he did it, and America stepped out and handed it over to Iraq. So this again is not unprecedented. This stuff has happened. The world is never a perfect place. That's why leadership of individual countries, have to act right first. Again, I can't say it enough. Take care of your own, and all this other, drama on the world stage will not be happening. Venezuela is where Venezuela is, because Venezuela, again, is like, a rotten meat that's, allowed the flies to come and land on it. You take care of your own, you manage your public relations, effort, and certain things will not be happening to you. If you take care of your home, your neighbors will not come in and unduly invade you or attack you. This is just the first, call of duty for anybody who is a reasonable president. Focus internally. It took America 106 years after independence for the president of America to leave the country. And where did they go? Panama. If not for the World War I and II, America was going to say, let me focus on ourselves. But you look at Africa, for instance, Nkrumah got independence in 1957, and shortly after that, he was talking about Pan-Africanism. And then he was overthrown. Secure the plate before you go for the pan. Focus on what is within you to control, to build that support. Every politics is about, can the people you are president of trust you? Can they believe in you? Nobody gets 100% trust, but at least make the efforts to communicate with them. The oil thing is overplayed out, is overstretched. I don't want to get into it because, we're not going to come to an end. This is now medicine after death. What do we have to look forward to? What is Venezuela going to learn from this? What is the rest of the world going to learn from this? And that lesson is evolving, is unfolding, and because the world politics, something else can happen tomorrow, and everybody forgets about Venezuela. That's just how these things work. To be president is not like a regular job where you go in and they're giving, this is your job for that. 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, the phone can ring and something else happens. But again, let's go back to the responsibility each president owes the people that they are holding themselves out as their leader. UN, World, UN, Euro, African Union, ECOWAS, however many places they are, we may live in a global village, but we still have individual countries because we don't carry global passport. Everybody comes in from a country with a passport identified to a specific country. Take care of that particular image. That is the optics that matters, not the optics of what somebody else is going to come do for you. America did what America has done, and nobody's going to do anything about it. We all can complain in a beer parlor, chant and beat our chests and say, hey, how dare them do this? They did it. And then what? Like I said, we say in Texas, it's like a bad weather. What are you going to do with it? You just sit back and enjoy it until it blows over. So Venezuela, sorry, Maduro, sorry, your wife, all of you guys now are sitting somewhere and you're asking yourself, how did I get here? Yes, there are many thousands of ways he can have done it, but he didn't do it. He did it. He was told to resign. He allowed his ego to get in the way, forgetting that his ego is not his capacity. Again, did the Venezuelan military put up any fight? Even if you had a special guard that guards the presidential palace, did they even put up a fight? What does that tell you about capacity? It's not beating your chest. It's not saying, I'm not going to do it. You did it, and you did it in a very shameful way. Now this is now part of the, global history, and, those who write papers or stuff like that are going to be coming up with all kinds of permutations. The point is that this thing that wasn't by accident. There were months, leading up to this, do this, let's have a conversation. He didn't. Instead, he was running to Russia and running to China. At the end of the day, did Russia show up? Did China show up? Did Brazil show up? Just like everybody's talking about the BRICS and the BRICS, at the end of the day, you don't need all of that lousy.
Ejike, I'd like to interject very quickly. I'd like to interject especially because you mentioned Brazil. The president of Brazil, Lula, mentioned that the U.S. action constitute a serious affront to Venezuela's sovereignty. I'd like for us to also
did they send a military? Did they send any military force to fight the U.S. on behalf of Venezuela? That's what I'm saying. Anybody can condemn this action. Okay, that's, you go do a poll today, there are going to be 50-50 or, 80-20 people for or against either way. But the point is, those who are doing it, those are enabling it. They said, hey, if you need military people, if they come over here, our soldiers are going to fly in and they're going to stop. This was an airlift. It wasn't like they went by road. Why didn't they use their military power, their air force, to shoot down the American plane that is carrying their president? Did they do that? So then again, it's like somebody cheering you, hey, go for it, and you're in the boxing ring and you're getting knocked out. Who is going to bear the pain? Again, we have to recognize the strength and the weaknesses. There are not too many countries that have the strength to do whatever it is. But again, it's an ego thing. Every president has an ego. But my God, You look at yourself and look at your capacity. You know, the Air Force of Venezuela, did you see any plane chasing the American plane? Did you? I mean, those are the things that needs to matter at this point. Yes, somebody came in and grabbed your president and took it. Hey, Nigeria did it to Charles Taylor, or Charles Taylor was tricked to Nigeria and before he was shipped over to The Hague. Did the African Union say anything about Obasanjo doing that? Did they sanction him? Charles Taylor was handed over. In fact, even when Obama was in office, Uhuru was being tried over there at The Hague. But they placed on diplomacy, and those charges were were dropped. So these things go on, but nations have to understand their own strength. And when you don't have the money, the military and the public relations machinery to tell your story, you are at the mercy of somebody who has. That is why China is doing what China is doing in Africa. And Africans are over there, welcoming them. They're not doing it by military invasion. Africans are inviting them. And then, just like when you invite ants into your home, what do you expect? They're going to destroy you. So what you got to do is start to be strong from the within, and then build a coalition of people to support you that are neighboring countries. But you look at the case of Africa, most African countries don't even like each other. If Nigeria were to be attacked today, do you think who's going to come to the rescue of Nigeria? They probably will be happy. Hey, the biggest, most populous black nation in the world. Look at how they are falling apart. So again, this is a good conversation. It is welcome. But what lessons can be learned? What lessons can be learned? Nobody wants their home to be invaded. But when you expose yourself to that invasion, then you have to bear the consequences. Like I said, if somebody comes into my home to take my wife, guess what? I will not blame the person who comes in to take my wife. I blame myself to having created the condition to enable him to even think about coming into my home to do it. That is the attitude nations have to have. Before somebody comes to you, they have to have psychologically studied you, look at your weaknesses and see how they can come in, and even your own people will rally against you. So let your people be your biggest defense force. Because if the people of Venezuela liked what this guy was doing, many of them probably would be at the airport, say, kill all of us. But they didn't like him. You see the jubilation. So what does that tell you? America is not a perfect nation, but America is one that has the manifest destiny.
Ejike, I'd like you to hold your thoughts on that as we take some stories on the local front, but we definitely are coming back to you on that. We go back now to our guests, Adeniyi and Mr. Ejike. Of course, the top story tonight is the detention and the arraignment of the president of Venezuela. Let's start with you, Adeniyi, because, of course, that was a heated response from Ejike. Taking into consideration the Latin American countries, the president, of course, as well, President Javier Milei's statement highlighted a stark dichotomy between good and evil. How do you interpret this framing, and what implications does this have for Argentina's foreign policy and its role in regional diplomacy with Venezuela?
Well, I think it's important to also understand that the current leadership of the country reasoned itself out of this situation. And it took the leadership of the country for now to have been able to say, we're going to cut cost on our leadership and ensure that government is really for the people. And for him to have spoken that way, it's obvious that it is because certain things have been addressed from the inside, and it gives him that bragging right to say what it has to be said. Do not forget, as far as Argentina and Brazil are concerned, they're arguably more or less like the strongest economy in Southern America. So when they speak to issues of this nature, they have to speak as leaders of thoughts and opinions in that region. But at the same time, the things we see in South America are also prevalent in many parts of the world. And like my friend also said, he was talking about the depletion of the economy of Venezuela. Let's understand that Venezuela as a country, yes, the reality is that lots of the narco-terrorism accusations have been proven because of the ferrying of drugs from that part on the waterways into other parts of the region or outside of that region. But even at that, let's just imagine for us that Putin invaded Ukraine and stole Zelensky and took him back to Russia. Mm-hmm. If we imagine such a situation, And now people are going to regard it as something that is preposterous in global politics. I do not even think that the way we have Russia now, without being pummeled as we would have expected, is not going to be the story. My position that I strongly hold is while I hail the intervention of the United States of America in global issues and that affect the people of those countries, I also am a man who believes in processes to an end. And no matter what we discuss here today, I'm going to take that out. Venezuela has 30 million people. It was talking about Paul Bremer over there in Iraq. Let's understand the template for Iraq was a complete war before Iraq was managed the way Paul Bremer managed Iraq. So I do not think that both can be put on a parallel line because they are different situations. Economic issues prevalent in Venezuela, drugs and crime prevalent, but in Iraq, there could never have been a government in place to put Iraqis in order, the same way we have the problem in Libya right now, where you have factional rebel groups.
Right.
I'm simply saying here that it is key to look at things from that light. So when you're talking about good and evil, any leadership of the world can say, this is the position they hold, and they have every right to say that. And I also believe that because Argentina and Venezuela are both in the Americas, there must have been communication back and forth over the years about how he is beginning to lose ground. But again, I need to remind us, a country that practices socialism is a country whose perspective on politics and leadership will be different. So we need to also be able to sieve out what are the limitations or the pluses of socialism. Because if you also look at democratic institutions or democratic sovereignties, you'd find out that the imbalance is that there are many persons that are super rich, and there are people often not known to the world that are super poor. So let's know that but for sanctions and many other things, and the fact that at times when you are not on the good books of the West, especially when your leadership is affected, definitely you will not be able to have whatever crude or whatever energy that were available to the world again. So economic sanctions can cripple the capacity of countries' economy, such as we have seen in Venezuela, where the currency of that country became like the currency of Zimbabwe when Robert Mugabe was there, almost valueless. But the picture then again is, if this can happen inside America, I think it's time for the West to zoom their lens to Africa, to look at countries where you have like a Yoweri Museveni, who transited from a military ruler and he became a civilian and influenced the lawmakers in that country in the eyes of the world to alter the constitution so that they can remain in power. The same thing for Alassane Ouattara as supported by France. In fact, Africa, especially the western part of Africa, would have launched the eco currency between 2019 and 2020, but the same France, one of the power global blocs, messed it up. So while we could say you probably allow the person who comes into your house to take your wife to have done it, excuse me, there are certain things that you did not do. You perhaps are trying to do everything right. Everything right. Let's look at Rwanda. What happened in Rwanda? The people that were killed in Rwanda, why did the international community leave Rwanda to lose 800,000 plus people? Just why? Because in Rwanda, we didn't consider there were potentialities that could be exploited. So the international, the global community looked away, and the Hutus and the Tutsis killed one another, almost 1 million people. So let's understand here that what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And when we talk about countries mediating in issues that affect all other sovereignties, there has to be an internationally agreed due process of doing it. Yes, China, Russia looked away because China and Russia also have the ideology that are different from the ideas of the West. Let's forget that up until 1989, thereabout, the Berlin Wall was still standing. The Berlin Wall came down. Communism got destroyed. That side of Germany got integrated, and everything appears to be running. I'm simply saying that if you have a country like Russia that lost the most people in the Second World War, and considering the politics that played out even after the Second World War, that is another conversation for another day. Let's know that an action would usually result in a reaction. And because the whole thing being done by Russia is as a result of not actually sticking to certain agreement. Yes, nobody should invade another country. I agree 100%. But when you have certain blueprints kept on ground for you to follow, and a side fulfills its own side, and the other side doesn't, when it gets to a point, you see such action. What about China? Up until about 1950s, 1960, China was still redoing.
Adeniyi, I'll just cut you there very quickly.
All right.
What we're seeing, of course, I think we saw the helicopters landing. If you are watching the screen, we saw the helicopters landing, and it would appear as though President Maduro has landed and the vehicles seem to be in motion. So there is movement there. It appears as if he is being taken to the facilities in Brooklyn. Adeniyi, before I head back to, thank you so much for that. Before I go back to Ejike, my question to you is a question surrounding sovereignty. I think this one hit home a bit, especially when I was listening to Ejike's response. It would appear as though sovereignty, we exercise that card when it is beneficial. Then when other players are in the game, those rules do not apply. Taking into consideration what has just happened now, like you guys both agreed that we look at the United Nations, we look at the African Union, they speak when they would like to. But at what point does sovereignty apply and when does it not apply? Are we now looking at a situation or coming into a reality that says if a big player like the United States decides that they want to infiltrate a nation, they can infiltrate it without any agreements and there is absolutely nothing that can be done?
All right. I think that I'm going to agree 100% with Ejike on one thing, and it's the fact that you have to take care of your people.
Right. You
have to do all you need to do for your people in your home, if at all you do not want to be a cheap meat for the global community to chew upon. He talked about Charles Taylor. At some point, Liberians were being slaughtered like animals. If you look at Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, at the outset of the fact that he was a wanted man, what were the issues that took place in Sudan is people did not give him up. In fact, that was the strongest point of the African Union, where he also came to South Africa. For none of the meetings, I think the person who took over, Thabo Mbeki, was still in power, that when he came to South Africa, he went back to Sudan and he wasn't arrested, despite the particular wanted tag on his head. I'm simply saying that whatever is happening in Venezuela now is a lesson for the likes of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who at some point have taken to doing things in a very politically rascally manner and a very disrespectful manner, such as we have the tax law issue, where despite issues raised, he still had the temerity to say that they were going to work, go ahead and implement it, when there was something raised by the federal lawmaker that should have been looked into at first. So it is very, very instructive. Sovereignty is only strengthened and emboldened as your priority, that your people do not have to always find hope elsewhere before they find out that, yes, leadership can be accountable or there is hope in this country where we live. So I think that the definition of sovereignty itself, one way or the other, may not also be that way, despite having done everything for your own people to believe that you have the capacity to do things as it were. If you check what is happening in Syria, for instance, the person who heads Syria at the moment, at some point, was like a wanted person with $10 million tag on his head. How that change remains within the rank and file papers of the global leaders, and particularly the leadership of certain countries of the world. So when you're talking about sovereignty, sovereignty itself doesn't have a black and blue and black and white definition, because the sovereignty of a place like Qatar that is supporting Hezbollah and Hamas, yet that is where we go to see how they can resolve the issue of Israel and Palestine. It's also funny that the same definitions may not be given to perhaps a country like Russia. Yes, these countries that I've mentioned have their limitations and certain things they have not done right, but we really must begin to define what sovereignty is, especially when we talk about whose ox is God or whose person's bread is buttered here. That's it.
Ejike, I'd like to come to you. It's been said that Trump has or is gunning for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, taking a look at some of the affairs that he's been busy with, we look at the missiles that went off in Nigeria. We look at the statement that he made just yesterday concerning would have been Iran. Yes. My question to you, and of course South Africa as well, taking a look at the fact that this is what is being said, is this the way to go about leadership and, of course, that gunning or the running for the Nobel Peace Prize?
I don't even think he's so concerned about getting a Nobel Peace Prize. Obama got it, so many other people have gotten it. And at the end of the day, my wife always asks me, what has that got to do with the price of bread? I'd rather be a president in a country that loves me and want me to do things right, or at least see my effort doing things, as opposed to being out there on the world stage and trying to please everybody and pleasing nobody. So if he gets it, fine. If he doesn't get it, Trump is Trump. But what I want to say is just, the issue of sovereignty. It has to be the first port of call is your people. There are 180 something countries in the world. They don't even have similar government. It's harder to pick a country A and B and say their government style is the same. So what needs to happen here is, how do we harmonize? How are we able to live in this global village and be able to accommodate and tolerate each other in order to get certain things done? There's going to be people who don't like you. There's going to be people you like. You build those alliances, but at the end of the day, remember the basic thing about human nature. Everybody wants that clothing, food, and shelter, and any other thing is extra. How is your own government responding to those three basic needs? You look at the case of Nigeria. Nigeria had electricity 40 years after America had electricity. Nigeria had electricity 64 years before independence. America had it 106 years after independence. Where is Nigeria today producing electricity? The installed capacity in Nigeria is about 8,000 megawatts. What's the challenge for the most populous black nation that DC chairs are being the smartest people in the world, but you're not running a smart country? These are things people are going to look at and say that's where the sovereignty starts. It's not when other people come in and do it for you. You look at Naira. When I left Nigeria for America after my youth service, it cost me 698 Naira 50 kobo to buy my tickets that flew me from Enugu to Lagos to London to Dallas. Today, the equivalence of that money in 1987 when I left was almost $1,200. I can still fly to Nigeria for $1,200, but no Nigerian can even buy anything of substance with 700 naira. That is what the sovereignty has to be. That is what everybody needs to be talking about. The National Assembly don't talk about it. When Obasanjo came into power in 1999, if you had 1 million naira, it was almost $12,000. 26 years into democracy. If democracy is going to be the panacea for economic development, how come the Naira has gone the way it has gone? By now, the Naira should have headed the other direction. Maybe 1 million Naira would have been $25,000. These are things Nigerians and their leadership have to focus on and not be distracted by these other things happening around them. Nigeria has to be the trigger for Africa, but for Nigeria to be the trigger for Africa, it has to have the confidence to even lead its own people. It's still a very tribalistic country. It's still a very country that is a waterfall. When the president gets in there, they don't do anything. Okay, Obasanjo didn't have a minister for petroleum. He had an advisor, Lukman Lawani. Tinubu, not Tinubu, Jonathan had, and then the one she had, what did she do? She's now outside of the country being alleged of taking so much money. And then who comes in again? Buhari didn't have, and then Tinubu didn't have. And the National Assembly has not stood up and said, Mr. President, all these are constitutional requirements. You have to fulfill all of it. You cannot keep it for us. That's how you test your own leadership. Mm-hmm. But Tinubu hasn't done it. Tinubu goes to France to go do whatever it is he does. And this is the first time the president of Nigeria is preferring trans over the traditional partner of UK. That's a choice to make. But then when he gets sick, how many times have you seen Tinubu in a sick bed in Nigeria? These are things Nigerians have to be, all these Nigerians are smart and they have the best doctors. If you have the best doctors and your own president is not even trusting you guys to treat them, then something is wrong. You have to get back to the drawing table. The National Assembly is a rubber stamp for Tinubu because Abio and his, a group of people do whatever they want. That's not what democracy is supposed to be. Let us not get distracted with Venezuela. Venezuela is a country how many miles away from Nigeria. Focus on what matters to you. Like I said, I live in my neighborhood. I have to preserve myself in order for me to be a useful member in my neighborhood. I don't have to look up to my neighbor to do that. I have to focus on my family because, like John Adams said in 1789, the success of every nation starts with the private families. It's from before somebody becomes your president or whatever, it's somebody's brother and sister. So what are they doing before they became that? There's no accountability in Nigeria. There's no accountability in most of the African countries. Biya has been there since 1982. Cameroon has only had 2 presidents since independence. Kenya has only had 5. So, but all of that doesn't still mean stability in their political structure hasn't even gotten them the mileage they need because they are still kowtowing toward France. The France that has no reasonable military to do anything, this France that is almost falling apart is a big boy in Africa. Sometimes, you got to set up and say, sir, you are the age of my grandson, I ain't going to listen to you. That's how we do it in Texas. When you show up, I say, who the heck are you? But Macron is over there running circles around Tinubu, running circles about the guy on the Ivory Coast, running circles about the guy in Cameroon, and there's so many other places. And this is a guy who is at the age of your grandson. Why? Sometimes in international politics, you have to bluff somebody, say, watch me do it. There's an expression in Texas, say, come and take it. That's when Texas took something from Mexico and Mexicans were crying and whining. Texas said, come and take it. And they never showed up. So, but God favors the bold. It's not the meek. The meek does not inherit the earth. Anybody who's believing that obviously doesn't understand, because if the meek inherited the earth, the Europeans that came to America and took over here were not meek. They were bold. So again, this conversation has had a very good poise being made. But for me, the only 2 countries that matter to me is the country of my birth, Nigeria, and the one of my naturalization. I will never come back to live in Nigeria, but I want to see Nigeria succeed. So that way there's no pressure of sending money, not sending money, so that people can live well. Because other people came to America and became Americans. So I don't have to go back, but I can support what goes on in Nigeria. It breaks my heart to come to Nigeria and see people, not getting paid while the governors are out on the street dancing and throwing. Have you ever seen Nigerian leaders, each time they see themselves, they're laughing and clapping and hugging each other? Is that what you were elected to do?
Okay, if you'll allow me to...
Excuse me, and you put up your cars and your mansions as if that is what makes the people. And like they say, this is the one country here, American doctors will never go on strike. Never, but Nigerian doctors go on strike. And how much money are they asking to be paid? You're paying somebody 70,000 naira, which is less than $20, $30 a month. And then you have a minister or somebody who's going to pocket billions and they fly and take out of the country and nobody catches them. Come on, 21st century. And again, you say you're the smartest people in the world. Please run a smart country, because that's where the sovereign strength comes from.
2 more questions for you, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Ejike, then I will end with you, Adeniyi. Ejike, it was only on Friday, literally on Friday, that Mr. Maduro, the president, of course, extended an olive branch to President Trump, seeking peace talks with him. Taking a look at where we are right now, is it safe to say Maduro read the handwriting on the wall, or what was the change between Friday and Saturday when he was captured?
Well, maybe he offered the olive branch, and it was ignored. So, like, too late. Too late at the time he did it. But again, this is all over now. Again, medicine after death is all over. It is, well, how can we, repair the damage, and how can we move forward? Are we going to say, something like this is not going to happen again? We don't know that. But again, I'm about that. I'm territorial. You can't come and take anything from me. I don't want to give you. But while that is going on, I'm also going to be cognizant of my strength and want to know who can I partner with or who can I collaborate with. That's what this international leadership is. How do you build an alliance? But while you're building an alliance, you don't have to be overly dependent on the alliance, partner. You have to reserve some things for you. So I want to see the world in a peaceful place. I don't want to see people struggling. It breaks my heart when I come home, I see people struggling, and not being paid while their leaders are celebrating. It's not, I don't have any words to justify that. Do the right thing for the people. And if you do it, you can go home and sleep well. You may not even be sick. But when you are punishing people and abusing them, the stress that gives you the sickness. And that is why you see all these African leaders. When I met Obasanjo sometimes in Dallas, and I say, Mr. President, your wife died in Spain. Babangida's wife died in LA. Yaradua died somewhere else. But in all these other people, I said, what is it that you see in all these hospitals abroad? You cannot say, I want all this equipment here shipped to Nigeria, and I'm going to have Nigerian doctors do it. You know what Obasanjo said to me? He said, well, I have to go abroad every 2 years for medical checkup. This is what the president of the most populous black nation said at a health seminar he attended in SMU, Southern Methodist University in Nigeria. I was mortified by such an answer, because by now the Nigerian president, just like, imagine the president of America saying he's going to London for medical treatment. What is the medicine that a Nigerian doctor hasn't learned? Or what is the equipment there that they cannot buy and bring home and give themselves the opportunity to say, if I'm sick, treat me here. If I die, that's my time. But not to where you have a stomach ache, all of a sudden you hop in the plane and you're flying out. It's not fair. That's not how you build capacity. So, again, thank you for the conversation that Venezuela, has caused us to do. But again, I always go back to my wife. And so I said, what has that got to do with the price of bread? Can we focus on what affects us as a family as opposed to this other stuff? Can Nigerians focus on what affects them as a nation and take pride in being a Nigerian and take pride in saying, hey, you can come and do this over here. We can take care of our own. Respect is reciprocal. And if you don't respect yourself, nobody else is going to do it. Everybody's watching everybody, and they're going to exploit your weakness. Why isn't it, for example, why should a Lebanese guy have the largest public works contract in the history of Nigeria building the coastal highway when you have Nigerian engineers? How many Nigerians have gone to Lebanon and gotten a contract of 1 million, or China or India or Turkish, where all these people come into Nigeria on circles? This is what makes you a sovereign nation. Yes. You don't yield to everybody else and go to the back room. If somebody comes into your home and kicks you to the boys' quarters, the shame is on you. Nigerians have to say, heck no, you can't do it. What school did you go to that a Nigerian hasn't gone to?
I'm going to have to cut you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Same question to you, please.
Well, I think that the reference points are very clear for us, which has to do with the fact that a level of knowledge is expected for you to have and to build by yourself so that you can know your place as far as the country is concerned. I was at a session where I asked the former vice president with Buhari, that's Professor Yemi Osinbajo, that is it possible to shut down the respective offices and not use any power generating set so that we can actually focus on building our power capacity? The vice president said that we cannot do that. All the offices will not work. And this was recorded and captured on major television stations in the country's news. The reason that can happen is because, to an extent, the former vice president doesn't even understand the implication of not having the capacity to ensure that we sustain ourselves energy-wise You're talking about physics. That's what electricity is. And that's one of the simplest of sciences. If you must look at what power generation is and the fact that it has metamorphosed over the years and having access to it and making it possible could not be something you call rocket science. You must also understand that there's a deliberate reason why they've kept many people in northern Nigeria uneducated, why they've left people as illiterate, and why the public education sector itself is totally a mess in the country, whereas they're empowering private schools to actually have the sway. In fact, also universities. It is simply because if we go at the level that Nigeria's first, second generation of those who access university education or college education actually did it, then the country, in my own candid estimation, will not take all of this mess. So you find out that the structures and system of political governance are deliberate in whittling down the capacity of the citizenry, and quite frankly, that has worked to a great extent for them, and that is why the country is still this way. And until, and I mean it, until those that we give the privilege of delegated responsibility as lawmakers, as councillors, as all of these people from the local government to the state government to the federal government have their terms of references defined by either making sure they sign certain stipulations and ensuring that you have the capacity to actually make things happen or undo things for them, they won't stop. Look at the constitution of the country, for instance. You cannot build nothing on something or want to be something on nothing. The constitution with which Nigeria is administered now is not even a constitution that is agreed to the entire country. So if we are looking at what is happening in Venezuela and the fact that the government has gone down and the fact that Maduro offered the olive branch, it's because he understood, and do not forget, no matter how you look at it, intelligence goes from one country to the other, and don't forget, countries tap on another's communication. Perhaps he already found out that it was definite for the United States of America to come into his country and uproot him out because he didn't take the olive branch or the privileges that he offered to him before, or the options available to him, and now he felt, okay, let me, in my position as the president of Venezuela also, just offer an olive branch. It's all about ego, but what has that brought him now? So taking it back to mother country, which is Nigeria, it is very, very important, bearing in mind what has happened, that the citizens will build a consensus to unseat whoever, albeit legitimately, the person who doesn't allow that democracy, as we have called it, to really thrive and be beneficial to the people. I have never seen a president, at least we thought we've seen the worst of Buhari, somebody that doesn't even make statements on critical issues that you'd expect him to make statements on. For instance, President Donald Trump made a statement after there was what? The deployment of missiles to Sokoto. The president of the country cannot be talking to us on social media or through his public or his advisors. There are issues where nobody makes any statement until you have made clear statement and describe the position of the country. It's utter disregard. When they talk about the alliance with France over our tax issues, it's a disregard for the president of the country not to make a statement, not your tax administrator, not your special advisor. It is a national issue of people's BVNs, NIN, information, the country's resources. You cannot hand it over. Because when any country enables that, it simply means you are handing over your financial or fiscal sovereignty to that country. So I'm simply saying that Nigerians must themselves be resolute right now and insist, I dare say, on ensuring that if the leadership of a country doesn't fulfill its terms of reference, by all means possible without bloodshed, please, because this has to be very clearly, ensure that that president is unseated. And the year 2027 is coming. If you look at the silence of people, the president, before the United States deployed those missiles, we were talking repeatedly about the killings in the north. Excuse me, people were saying there's no genocide. When the people who came and did their findings realized that according to documented facts and figures, Nigeria is becoming a pariah state because some people are even insistent on making the country a one-religion state. Even one of the country's finance intelligence officer in 2021, talking about Commodore Olaomi, he said on a national television that there are people in Buhari's government that want Nigeria Islamized, that he doesn't know what's in their head, that even the DSS have tons and tons of reports and nothing happened. As I'm speaking with you right now, one of the things that has been abusing the sovereignty of Nigeria is that your current Minister of State for Defense had been accused by his successor in Zamfara State that is in cahoots with Boko Haram. Are you not supposed to suspend him and do your investigation? In utter disregard to Nigeria, President Tinubu did not issue a statement. He looked in another direction. You find a Sheikh Gumi, for instance, while Nigerian military officers are dying in battlefront, trying to keep the sovereignty of Nigeria intact from jihadists, then a certain cleric that even May this year was denied entry into Saudi Arabia.
Adeniyi.
Even in 2010, about, excuse me, please, you let me not land on my thoughts. I beg you now. Because this country has with the privilege of being naturalized citizens here in the US doesn't mean that our country of birth should go up in flames. You cannot have these kind of things happen and you feel that the country is sovereign. It means there are certain things more than meets the eyes. So I'm simply saying here that a level of demand must be made by citizens so that we'll not become a country that is without leadership, that replicates a rudderless ship going with the winds without a sail. Because if Nigeria, the most populous black nation in the country, fails, especially if anything breaks out, that there's no constituted authority or leadership, excuse me, the world will feel the disarray of the country. And even those of us who are here, because that's our country of birth, we're not going to be exempted from that. So the media also, in this way, should stop being culpable. The media. I'm not saying you, because your media house takes on the hard or the difficult question. I've seen other media houses appear as if they do not even understand that the media is the shadow government of the citizens, And what the media is supposed to do is to represent the opinions and ideas that will consistently keep the leadership of the country in check until we're ready. For those of us who have signed on to this to ensure Nigeria survives, we're there. But majority of Nigerians must also ensure that they demand this unequivocally from their leaders. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.